Thank you, Gary. Thanks so much for sharing. And again, welcome to everyone who's joined us during the reading. I am putting an address or a link to our Dropbox for this meeting, and you can see any of the speakers over the last 2.5 years for this meeting. If you go to the very bottom of that link, you'll see last week's Veronica, and then everywhere it'll go upward from there. But tonight I want to welcome Harold. Harold, I'm so glad that you're willing to join us from St. Louis, and I don't want to take any more of your time. I want to welcome you and turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, everybody. My name's Harold. I'm an alcoholic. Can you hear me? Thumbs up. Good. Great to be here. My sobriety date is April 7th, 1987. My home group here in St. Louis, Missouri is called AA on the Rocks, and we meet on Wednesday nights in South City. If you're familiar with St. Louis, if you ever come to St. Louis, I hope that you look us up and come hang out. If you get a hold of me early enough, I promise you I will put you to work somehow, some way, and get some mileage out of you in Big Mo. But we'd love to have you and have you come visit. I come from a great line of sponsorship. I've been sponsored well in my sobriety. Tom I was my sponsor most of my life. Many of you know that. I know Gary knows him and other friends on here that know Tom. And Tom, unfortunately, is still sober today. He's sober 65 years. But unfortunately, he has Alzheimer's and he's in a nursing home today. Has been for about 7 years. So not in the capacity to sponsor anymore, but he will always be my sponsor until he goes to the big meeting in the sky. That's for sure. And my sponsor today is Steve O out of Nashville. Some of you know Steve as well. That just give you a little bit of how I've been sponsored and where I come from. But all those things have made a difference in how my life has turned out for sure. I've had the privilege to be on this particular group before, earlier in the pandemic. And so it's a privilege to come back. So Chris, thanks for inviting me. And Chris and I had a great talk just the last week or so. We talked for quite a while. So it was great to get to know you better. Talking about emotional sobriety, today has been a turbulent, or the last week has been a turbulent of emotions for me, just to be transparent up front as it comes to two sponsees that I have, and both of them are long-term sponsees. The first one had a major heart attack on Saturday, and he's still in ICU, and he's got his home group around him, and there's just a lot of you out there, a lot of fellowship people that are around him and his family. I just got a text from his wife that they took him off the ventilator, but they put him back on it because his lungs still just aren't strong enough to sustain himself, be self-supporting, if you would, through his own contributions. So he's got a tough way to go. And so we're that creates a lot of disturbance in the force, if you want to use a Star Wars reference. And then, of course, there's another gentleman that I've sponsored for many, many years, inside the walls to outside the walls. And I've got several of those guys that I work with. And this particular one has found himself, I think, in a relapse in a pretty turbulent situation. I got a call from his boss and some other people about some chaos going on and his diversion of that. And he just texted me a few minutes ago and said he's willing to meet me early in the morning to have a sit down face to face and hopefully get real moment. But both of those, to be transparent, have definitely caused a disturbance in my emotional self. But, because of I would hope emotional growth and maturity, spiritual maturity, if you like, over the years, you're able to respond to those things in a much more patient manner today, and not jump the gun or to refrain from tongue and pen, and to seek wise counsel, which I did with my sponsor earlier today, before you just respond to these pretty emotionally and dramatic situations that are unfolding in people's lives. And they always will, because the big pillars of life, and I call them the big pillars of life, but that's what they are. I mean, the first one we can't do anything about, and that's birth. Birth comes at us, and we are born into the families we're born in. Some of you come from decent families and a lot of love in your home, and you had that nuclear family and a lot of people around you and supportive. Others come from a very broken home, foster care, and maybe on the streets, and who knows, and a mixed bag of all that stuff. But all those environments, that context definitely shapes who we are, but we're powerless over that. Fate determines what that looks like in the beginning. And so we have that pillar to deal with. And that leads to a lot, I think, of what we're talking about tonight, whether we know it or not. And of course, if you live long enough, you'll deal with aging, you'll deal with illness, as my friend is tonight. and eventually we'll all deal with death. And it's not just us, but it's the people we love the most that we'll go on these journeys with. Especially if we live long enough, we'll experience all these things, and all these things will create different emotional challenges for us. And as the old saying goes, as I like to say, alcoholics are like tea bags. You don't know what they're made out of till you put them in hot water, right? And you get a little hot water and you find out real quick what you're made out of. And I don't think that's God testing us. I think that's just, personally, I think that's just life on life's terms, and life will test us. And what we're made of will determine how we respond to that. And we all go through cycles of life, and we're in different spaces and different places. And based on how spiritually plugged in we are at any given moment, will determine a lot how we respond to it, good, bad, or ugly. And so that's kind of that story. So I just want to be transparent where I'm at, emotionally tonight, as I sit here and talk to you guys about emotional sobriety, that it's been a challenging week, but a challenging 40 or 24 hours to say the least, dealing with this other guy that caught me out of the blue when I got some phone calls today that kind of took me back a little bit. It doesn't surprise me in the big scheme of things because of how broken we are and how cunning, baffling, and powerful alcoholism is and always will be till the day we die. And being a soul sickness, and I would define soul as your mind, your will, and your emotions. So that's how I would frame the terminology of soul, what that means. And so emotions are tied to that. And so when we look at a spiritual illness, or we're spiritually bankrupt, or we're depraved, or we're lost, or however you want to frame that language, whatever works for you, the emotions are part of that. And there's many, I don't know how scientifically certified it is, but I just know from my own experience, it's pretty true that, when we start suffering in the world, either from abuse or active alcoholism, is really, is when our growth starts to get stunted, especially emotionally and mentally, but definitely emotionally. And so when Bill makes that statement, what Gary read for us there in my book, I'm looking at the language of the heart, the big writing here, in that second full paragraph, that those adolescent urges, as he refers to them, these childlike emotions, as they rear their ugly head, we have to grow through that. Just a little backstory for you about me personally. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous for the first time, or was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous for the first time in 1979 in the Department of Corrections. That's where I was introduced to AA in Adair County Detention Center. And a couple fellows brought an AA meeting into this detention center. I had no idea what AA was. I never heard of it before, but it was an introduction. I think it's on page 105 of Bill Sees It. The title of that page, or at least part of that page, is titled Our Chief Responsibility. And it goes on to say that our chief responsibility to the newcomer, especially the newcomer, is to deliver an adequate demonstration of recovery. And that's definitely been my experience. I had some adequate demonstrations early on, even though I rejected the notion or the idea, even for a moment, that I was powerless over alcohol, the thing that I loved more than anything. I was so far from conceding that. But that's where I was introduced to AA in 1979. And in that same experience, I just got out of Boonville Correctional Center and was already arrested on another charge. So I was in that detention center being held. And when I got out on bail, the prosecuting attorney and the parole officer gave me a plea bargain option. It went something like this: you can either go back to Boonville Correctional Center for 2.5 more years, or you can go into this treatment center called the Care Unit for 30 days. Now, I'd quit school when I was 13, but I had enough math in me to know that 30 days was a heck of a lot shorter than 2.5 years. So I took that plea bargain and I went to treatment for the first time in 1980. And as I went to treatment, it was really a sentence more than it was an opportunity. And so I went like I was going to do 30 days in the county jail. And that's pretty much how the experience went. I got a big shiny coin for leaving. The Thomas boys picked me up from treatment. You should know right away if Johnny and Tommy Thomas pick you up in a pickup truck and you're in the country, that it's probably not going to fare well for you in the end. And we ended up on the Sheraton River, one of the best parties I've ever been to in my life. And they handed me a jug of jungle juice, which I think was Everclear, and some Kool-Aid maybe mixed in with it, and then some blotter acid with a Snoopy on it. And that's what I was digesting, 15 minutes after I was out of treatment. And the highlight of that night for me, I guess, in my broken, sick mind, was to go down to the river with some fellas and take that 30-day coin that they just give me and skip that across the river and pound my chest with some hillbilly rebel yell that like I had escaped, that I had achieved victory over that experience. And it would be a long time before I'd ever, come to concede to King Alcohol. It would be 7 more years to be exact. And it came right back through the Department of Corrections in 1987. And I was arrested for a 50 WI. In about a 6 to 7 week period, I had a 40 WI. I was involved in a fatality drunk driving accident where everybody in the other vehicle lost their life. And then I was arrested for a 50 WI conviction. So these were parole violations. This is a parole violation for me. These were felonies for me. And so I was 21 going on 22 and on my way back to the penitentiary. So that's where I started this journey in recovery. I mean, for good. I got on my knees. I was quarantined by myself in a drunk tank. I had nothing on but my underwear. It was freezing in there. And I got down on my knees and I said the most honest prayer that I've ever said in my life. And it was simply 3 words. I've heard it from the podiums in AA many, many times in the rooms of AA. And it was simply, God help me. And the difference between that time and all these other times, is that this time it was honest, whether I knew it or not. And I think we agnostics makes it clear that God doesn't make too hard of terms for those who honestly seek God. And so I honestly sought God, and my life's never been the same from that day till now. And I haven't found it necessary to drink in over 35 years. So I'm forever grateful. I found my way back to Alcoholics Anonymous. I found my way to treatment again. That same treatment center I was at in 1980, a couple hours from St. Louis. And I didn't go there to go to AA. I didn't go there to get a sponsor or get in recovery or do any of that. I went there because I knew about the place. It was a safe place. It's where an adequate demonstration of recovery was given to me at one point. And I knew I needed a piece of paper for the course. I knew I needed to show up when I stood in front of that judge. I had to have something that said I was trying to do something to better myself. And so that was my motivation to go. I was 12-step by a guy while I was there who only had about 2.5 years of sobriety, or 2.5 months of sobriety. He just got out of that treatment center. He was my age now. And he took an interest in me and pursued me until I came back to St. Louis, and he kept pursuing me. And I didn't go to AA. I was so consumed with this trial, but he stayed on me. And he would call me and I would answer the phone, and he would say, Harold, did you go to AA? And I'd say, no. And he'd ask me why not. And I couldn't really give him an answer why. I really didn't know at that time why. I was just terrified to go to AA. I was terrified to walk away from the only life that I'd ever known. But at the same time, I couldn't imagine my life continuing to live that way. I was just caught in that conundrum. And but he would say things, Harold, your life depends on you going. And as much as I didn't want that to be true, I knew that was a true statement. And finally, I got the courage to come and I started my journey in AA. But unfortunately, especially if you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, and if you are new, welcome, and I'm glad you're with us tonight. Unfortunately, I came to AA with the same demeanor I had my whole life, this extreme self-centeredness that you hear talked about in our rooms. The root of the problem, if you would, is what drove my life. And so I came in with this attitude, this arrogance that I'm going to do what I want, when I want, how I want, the way I want. If you don't like it, well, too bad for you. Because that's how I'm going to do it. It's how I did everything in my life. And so I came to the rooms with that same attitude. I definitely didn't want a sponsor. I'd had probation and parole officers my entire life, from the age of about 11 all the way into recovery and long after that. And I just wasn't interested in somebody else having say so in my life, or just tell me what to do, or even suggestion what to do. I just didn't want any of that. So I rejected all those things, and I just came. As a result of coming back, I got, I fell in love with some of the people here. I loved the energy in the room, the kinetic energy. I loved the laughter. I loved recovery, sobriety, emotional sobriety. I was attracted to all those things, and it kept me coming back. I got involved strongly in fellowship. I had a sober band. I was a rock and roll drummer my whole life, so I immediately had a sober band and played on sober softball teams and did a lot of fellowship stuff that kept me here long enough to finally come to the end of myself. And I think, honestly, that is what emotional sobriety really is for me. If I had to frame it a different way, Bill talks about the two extremes, the demands and the dependencies on people, places, and things in life. And it's that balance of going back and forth that creates opportunity for us to grow in understanding and effectiveness and from our own junk. that's most of it's at a subconscious level. It's not even at a conscious level to even see it for what it really is. And it gives us time to do that. But ultimately, if I had to shape it all out, it's just coming to the end of myself. This individualism that just runs rapid in our culture. We live in a culture that breeds it. Individualism, consumerism, materialism, secularism. Get all you can, be all you can be. Look out for number one. This is the junk that's vomited on us from the day we come into existence. And so it just feeds the root of my problem that I already had before any of that. I'm exposed to any of that. It just feeds it and puts it on steroids. And couple that with what I call the delusion of inequality, and then you got all the makings for a fine alcoholic. And this delusion of inequality is that I'm not enough, just who I am. This is a powerful delusion I think all human beings suffer from, but alcoholics definitely to an extreme measure. That just who I am as Harold Long, this country boy from the Ozark Mountains, is not enough, just the way that he is. You're just not enough. And that drove my life. What you thought of me paralyzed me long before I ever drank King alcohol. So you talk about emotional misfit or emotional dwarf. Well, I was all that plus a whole lot of other things, and that's how I came in. I when I look back at when I really see this active in my life was somewhere right around age or 8 or 9. I lived in a little country town on the Kansas-Oklahoma border in a town called Nevada. But somewhere right around 8 or 9, my mother said, look, we're going to move. It was just me and her. And she said, we're going to move. And I said, we're moving where? And she said, we're going to move to outskirts of St. Louis. And I said, why? And she says, well, you got a brother and 2 sisters you don't know about. And that just threw me in a tailspin, because here's this whole part of my mother's life that I absolutely had no idea even existed. And we moved back to St. Louis, and that's where my life really changed. That we came back, I was just this little country kid, and this delusion of inequality just pounced on me. And this driven by 100 forms of fear that we talk about in our book and our literature on page 62 just took off on steroids. And everything about me changed. I came here, it was the 70s. I looked like a little country kid. I didn't look like everybody else. The hippies were running everywhere. The Jesus freaks were everywhere. I just wasn't looking the part. And I immediately was going in, plea bargain with my mother. Man, I got to get new clothes. And she goes, "What's all this about?" And I said, "Man, I'm just not cool. I'm a drummer. I'm a lot of things, but I'm just not cool." And so immediately everything about me changed, and I started to grow my hair long, and it got as long as my friend Susan on here. I got long hair, and it was brown like hers, believe it or not, at least at one time, and I took the thumbtack out of my Kiss poster and I pierced my ear with it. So I had an earring, and I had big bell bottom pants. Some of you probably wore those. I had the big bell bottom pants, and Billy Jack was a badass on TV at that time. So I you always wore a black t-shirt and a blue jean jacket. So I had a black t-shirt and blue jean jacket, and I made a headband out of a piece of belt. I had gap teeth, I had freckles, I had pimples. I looked like a freaked out Howdy Doody. That's what I looked like. I was a mess, and eventually somebody said, "Hey, why don't you smoke a cigarette? Hey, why don't you do some of this? And hey, why don't you do some of that?" And eventually, "Hey, why don't you take a drink?" And all that started before I was even a teenager. My mother was married to 2 different alcoholics. Her parents died really young. She had no education, and being divorced twice in the 60s, nobody to turn to, nobody to rely on. It's a tough way to live as a woman, for sure. And so she did the best she could, but she was always hustling, always working 2 or 3 jobs. So by the age of 10, I just did what I wanted. I came and went as I pleased. I didn't have much oversight, and with that came a lot of exposure. I was a rock and roll drummer. I was invited into circles I didn't have any business being in. Hanging out with kids that were much older than I was, older teens, people in their 20s, some people in their 30s, and not good people. A lot of them, not all of them were bad, but there was a lot of them that were just pretty broken people. And broken people do broken things, and hurt people. And so, through that came all the abuse that kid could suffer on the streets: the physical abuse, the verbal abuse, the spiritual abuse, and of course the sexual abuse that involved both male and females. And all that was happening before I was even old enough to drive a car. And so to say that I was an emotional dwarf or emotionally damaged by the time I came to you people would be an understatement. I was fractured on many levels, although I didn't know it. I couldn't see it. And even as a child, I mean, this delusion of inequality is so powerful because even as a child, I mean, I've got a bunch of kids, I've raised kids, they're all adults now, but I just know, watch them grow up. I just helped oversight this whole kids event for a week. Just a few weeks ago, I watched 50 kids show up, K through sixth grade. I could watch the ones that the delusion of inequality was just having their way with them. They were just in their minds, and they were just emotionally trapped. And if you ask them, are you okay, the best they could do is shrug their shoulders or say, I'm fine. Or okay, they don't know how to articulate that. Neither did I didn't know how to articulate what 100 forms of fear looks like. What this gerbil cage of information that was just going around nonstop, how to articulate that in any fashion. And so I learned just ways to keep you from asking me, I'm fine, I'm good, leave me alone, mind your own business, whatever. Those little cliches became part of my everyday vocabulary. And so I show up to AA like this. And it took me 3 years. It took me really almost 3 years, a little over 3 years actually, before I ever surrendered to the idea of sponsorship or working the steps. It took me that long. And thank God I stayed. I didn't leave. And I finally humbled myself, and I asked this gentleman to be my sponsor. His name was Roy. And I went to Roy's house and I sat down with him, and he said, well, Harold, I've known you almost the whole time you've been in AA, but tell me about yourself. Where are you at today? What's going on with you right now? And I said, well, Roy, I'm 25 years old. I live in the basement of a house right up the street from you. I can walk down to your house. That's one of the reasons I asked Roy to sponsor, because it was close. I said, I don't have an education. I don't even have a GED. I got a criminal record. I don't have a driver's license. Matter of fact, I've never had a driver's license. I got a piece of crap car that's held together by bumper stickers that I can't legally drive, but I do anyway. I said, I got a dead end job. My life sucks just every which way you want to take it. And you can literally just take the word sucks, capitalize it, italicize it, underline it, highlight it, make a neon sign out of it if you like, and just flash it, because that's where my life was at. And I hadn't drank in 3 years. I hadn't drank King alcohol in 3 years. And so, I couldn't blame that anymore. I blamed a lot of things that was yet to come, but I definitely couldn't blame King alcohol any longer. And what he said to me ultimately changed my life. And what he said to me that night was the same truth as it is as I sit here with you tonight on July 28th at 8:05 Central Standard Time. And that truth was simply this: Harold, every single thing you got in your life right now, right this second, every single thing you got going on, you have attracted to you like a moth to a flame. You have attracted to you by the person that you become. And the day you're man enough to own that truth about yourself is the day you're on your way to some real change. But till you can own that truth, this vicious cycle you're on, you're going to eventually drink again because you're not happy about your sobriety. I know you don't think that's the truth right now, but trust me, it's coming. Or you're going to do what my dad did. Unfortunately, my dad could never get sober, and my dad took his life. That's how my dad quit drinking. So you're going to do one or two things. Man, you're either going to grow or you're going to go. And the $1 million question is, what do you want to do? And man, I didn't want to go. I can just promise you, I had too many lifelong friends already. I was pretty vested here. And I just didn't know what to do. I knew he was going to say, let's work the steps. And I just didn't believe the steps would change my life. I just didn't. I had too much individualism in me. I had too much materialism in me. Call me crazy, but I think I could be a little bit more happier if I had a few $100s in my pocket. Call me nuts, but that made total sense to me. Or if I had an education or a better look or a better job or a better looking girl or a girl at all, or a car that wasn't held together by bumper stickers. I could go on and on and on. But these are the delusion of inequality that put in me, is that you're measured by how many zeros are on your paycheck, by what kind of education titles you have behind your name, where you went to high school, who your parents were, what zip code you grew up in, what color your skin is, what is your gender, what's your sexuality. I mean, all these things were, vomited on us to determine what our worth what even was. And that junk ate my lunch. That's just the bottom line. It ate my lunch. And I just didn't believe a set of spiritual principles was going to change all that. And I think that's the dilemma all of us are under. I think Clancy used to say it well. He used to say that the hardest thing any of us will ever do is just to take actions we don't believe in. And man, there's just so much truth to that. But it's more than that. It's why. Why is that the case? And the truth is, it's belief. I just don't believe it's going to change my life. And I just don't, despite all the burning bushes and all the miracles and all the evidence around me. I just don't believe it's going to happen for a guy like me. And that's powerful delusion, but it wipes out so many of us. So, but I became desperate. I came to the end of myself. And I think if we're ever going to have a chance to grow emotionally, to really become the best us, the best version of us that we could ever possibly be, or even start to grow towards that, we have to come to the end of ourselves. And I think the book does a clear job of explaining it. I mean, right at the end of how it works, the ABCs, it says now we're at step 3. And what do we mean by that? And what do we do? I mean, that's just an awesome question. And the book responds with, well, the first requirement is that you got to be convinced that any life run on self could hardly be a success. Now, it's easy to blow right over that statement, but it's really the truth. Am I convinced? Well, I'll say yes in a heartbeat. I'm convinced, but my actions don't line up with my words. And of course, a dilemma that all of us face. And so it was a process of that and moving towards in that direction, that really coming all the way in, sitting all the way down, and being willing to stay and committed to this design for living. And I don't like to look at the steps in a systematic format, which is what happens, I think, a lot of time, at least in language and vocabulary. We talk about the steps in a tense fashion, almost a past tense. Why I'd worked the steps, or I'd worked the 4-step back then, like it's one and done. Like we get this desk, I'm sitting at IKEA. We come home, we open the directions, and you follow these 12 steps, and you got a desk. It's a way of life. There are principles to live by. And in the 12 and 12, and most of you know this, but in the forward to the 12 and 12, there's a definition for the steps. And I'm paraphrasing, but it says something to the effect that the 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in nature, if practiced as a way of life, will expel the compulsion to drink and lead to a life where you become happy and usefully whole. And that's powerful. That's way past not drinking. And that's all I was looking for when I got here, was I just don't want to drink anymore. I'm tired of the consequences of my drinking. And man, I've been overpaid, but I almost missed it all because I just wouldn't come all the way into the same, because I just didn't believe it would work for a guy like me. And it really, to grow emotionally, to really start to have growth. And I think I think emotional sobriety is pretty synonymous with spiritual maturity. I think they're the same thing, basically. And if you put any of those on a matrix, if you just put them on a scale and set a scale of 0 to 100, this is the emotional sobriety scale, or this is the spiritual maturity scale. I wasn't even on a scale, I don't think. I was probably a negative number, like a minus something, when I started this journey. And what I know to be true is I'll never be 100% here. I'm never going to be 100%. How it works reminds us that it's practice, not perfection. And but if I lived a life expectancy, and I lived to be 80, say 80 years old, for example, and I got out on that scale at some time at a 55 or a 65 or a 70, maybe, that would be a major, major home run from where I came from. And I would take it in a heartbeat. I really would take it in a heartbeat. But out of that matrix, or out of that scale, I think what's important, especially if you're new, is that I may not be fully mature emotionally or spiritually, but what I do know, to the bottom of my core, to every inch of my being, to every inch of my soul, is that I'm 100% right with this thing we call, or this entity, this deity we call a power greater than ourselves. I know I'm 100% right with that power. I didn't know that when I got here, but I know that today. And that's huge. When we get here, we have to overcome a lot of delusion. And you heard me share about the underlying one that's the culprit of them all, and that's the delusion of inequality. And Bill kind of frames it on page 61. He says, weren't we under the delusion that we could wrest satisfaction out of this world if we could just manage it well? It's just delusion of self, this individualism that just runs deep. And that's where this demands and dependency come from. It's this delusion that I can figure it out. If I can just grab a hold of it. It's like beach balls. If you're ever in a pool, it's summertime, many of you got pools or swimming. But if you take a beach ball and you just shove it under the water, you can hold it there for a while. And if somebody throws you another one, you can shove it down. And you can hold them both there for a while. You're fighting it. But man, if they throw you a third one, they just all blow up in your face, right? I mean, that's just kind of how life happens. And that's that demands and dependency stuff. You're just trying to manage all this stuff, and it just drives you insane. And Bill, in his own empathy, talks about how it just caused massive depression in his life, massive depression. And so, overcoming these delusions, and that's really what it is. I frame them into what I call the 5 big delusions, and I don't have time to get into those. I talk about those sometimes, but I'll just tell you what they are. And I think we have to wrestle with these 5 before we really get into any kind of real spiritual maturity or emotional sobriety growth scale. We have to overcome these delusions. Delusion number 1 is I'm not alcoholic, and that delusion kills most of us, right? I mean, and it's true. I mean, we toss the word denial around a lot in recovery, but it's a word that you only find twice in a big book, once on page 10 and once in the spiritual appendix, and both times talking about denying a power greater than ourselves. When it talks about this illness, this manifestation, this malady that we suffer from, it talks about it on the basis of delusion and illusion, meaning I can't see myself for what I really am, and I can't differentiate the true from the false. And that is huge. And that's why it destroys most people that it touches, because if it's denial, I know it's over there. I can see it, but I'm not going to look at it, but I know it's there. But when it's delusion, and it's staring me right in front of my face, and I can't see it for what it is. That's the nature of the beast. Despite all the evidence, despite what mom says, despite what the judge says, the courts say, probation and parole, my friends, my girlfriends, whatever, despite what all the evidence says, in my heart of hearts, I'm not what everything. You just don't understand. It's just not the way you see it. And it's that delusion that kills us. And so overcoming that delusion is feat number 1. But then we get here and we finally concede that we're alcoholic, but then we usually have some version of this. We don't say it necessarily like this, but this is what happens. But my name's Harold. I am an alcoholic, and I concede in my innermost self I'm powerless. But guess what? It's not my fault. It's not my fault that I'm alcoholic or I have this life. This is that emotional baggage that we're talking about. How bad, airline prices. Have you flown lately? It's expensive. It's so expensive that the other day I went to book a flight, and now they're wanting to charge you for emotional baggage. You were probably abused when you were a kid. That's another $50. Seriously, they're wanting to hammer you on this emotional baggage stuff now. But we all have our junk. But our book says to conclude that others is wrong is about as far as most of us ever got. So this is a fancy word for victimization. And the problem with victimization, and I had a tremendously bad case of it, is that I can drink myself to death and it's not my fault. I can sit in a 9x7 or 10x7 jail cell or 10x6 jail cell for the rest of my life, and it's just not my fault. I can blow my veins out. I can blow my nostrils out. I can blow my lungs out. Man, I can blow my brains out, and it's not my fault. And that's a powerful delusion. But I had to overcome that before I could ever really come all the way into this thing. The third delusion is that I could finally come to the rooms and get past that. I could finally say, my name is Harold. I am an alcoholic, and I'm willing and I'm trying to take full responsibility for my life. But let's just be real with each other. I broke so many hearts. I burnt so many bridges. There's just no way ever that I'm ever going to be able to reconcile for the damage that I've caused, the havoc I've caused, the pain that I've caused, the hardships that I've caused myself, and the mountains that I would have to climb to be some. Again, this is that delusion of inequality, to really be somebody. So why even try? And this delusion is so powerful that when it gets into our DNA, when it gets into the bloodstream of who we are, it causes discouragement. And when discouragement gets into our soul, well, we just quit. This is why we have a recidivism rate of 60-70% in our prison systems, and even higher in the treatment center world, because people are already given up before they ever leave. They hear the hope, but they don't believe it's possible for them. And they're hopeless, this seemingly hopeless state of mind, even though they're sequestered for 30 days or maybe years in prison. It's still just to penetrate that, to overcome that. And the older you are when you come here, the more powerful that delusion. So if you're 40 years old, you're 60 years old, you're 70, the older you are, that mountain looks that much bigger. And it seems like it's an impossible thing. My kids haven't talked to me in years, whatever, just going down the line. And this is a powerful delusion. It's not true, but when you're going through it, it feels pretty true. It feels like it's pretty real. And that owned me. So these delusions I'm talking about own me. Delusion number 4 is that I'm spiritually disqualified. I came here and I didn't have a relationship with God on any level. I had an intellectual idea. I grew up in the 70s. I grew up going to a Catholic church as a young boy, and I loved it. I'm not one of these recovering Catholics that says, look at the wounds from the brulers or the ball spots where they pulled hair out of my head. I'm not one of those guys. I loved church enough that I used to play it when I come home. I'd set up TV trays, make an altar, get out a blanket for a cool cover for the top of the altar. I dump the fruit out of the fruit bowl and fill it full of potato chips for the Eucharist. I get some great Kool-Aid for the wine, a cheap towel in the closet for a stole, get a Bible out I can promise you we never read. And a few knuckleheads come over, save a few souls at the Longhouse. It was a great day. That's just how I grew up. I grew up with the rock operas and Tommy and Hair and Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar. I could sing them all if you put all the soundtracks on. I could sing them almost verbatim today. So I had this spiritual upbringing of, in a spiritual idea about this power intellectually, but there was nothing in my soul connected to it. It was just an intellectual idea, And so when I seen God, I wasn't for or against. I was very agnostic. But I had enough this delusion of inequality. It beat me down to a pulp. My alcoholism and all the consequences beat me to a pulp that I just, in my mind's best thinking, that there's just no way I'm ever going to be able to experience the grace of God. And so God sounded like this, to me when I was here. I sit in the meetings, you guys, to talk about how you connected with God this morning and how the Spirit spoke to you and how the Spirit was alive in the room. I didn't experience any of that, but God sounded like this to me. This is prior to working the steps, of course, and I might have some moments of epiphanies, but the reality was I just didn't believe it was going to work for a guy like me. And to the point that the things that I was suffering emotionally, mentally, and just even tangibly, metaphysically in the world were just divine persecution, divine condemnation for how I've chose to live my life. They're just consequences from this God. It's the wrath of God that's causing me to suffer the way I'm suffering. It's God doing this to me. There are just elements and layers of this stuff. And it wasn't until I really got into the steps in 4 through 9 that I was able to bust this channel, if you would, this channel that connects us to each other, connects us to the world, connects us to the heavenly world, the heavenly realm, or if you wish, as our book would call it, the world of the spirit. That this is my channel to that connection. It was just clogged full of resentments and secrets and so many around the sexual stuff and crimes that I committed that I never got caught for. This is what all clogged my channel. And it wasn't until I worked 4 through 9, and especially 4 through 5, and I really told somebody else my entire life story. I cleared the channel for the first time in my entire life that I ever felt connected spiritually to anything. And it changed my life. It was obviously a game changer. And so 10, 11, and 12 today, as part of this emotional sobriety exercise, is to keep the channel clean, because life's going to happen. The pillars of life are going to happen. I just shared 2 of them with you today. It doesn't take much to get into your channel and cause you to go off, a pity trip or get a really good resentment cooking. And we know why resentments are so hard to get rid of, because we create them. We water them, we nurture them, we fertilize them. We even put Miracle-Gro on some of them, we grow them up to be these big bad burglars, and they're hard to get rid of. So this is a junk that still tries to manifest in our channels. And so we have these steps, and we need a sponsor as much today as we ever did. I talked to my sponsor today about some of this stuff. We need somebody who's not emotionally or financially invested in our deal, whatever our deal is, that can help us see past the delusion, see past the twisted perceptions of what's going on in our life. That's the big power of that. And so I need that as much today as I did day one. I need that still today to be able to see the truth, because the delusion runs deep in my life. And as my buddy Henry says all the time, my life is great as long as I'm not involved in it, and that's just a pretty good statement. I just love that statement. But and so delusion number 5 is the delusion that there's no real purpose for my life. And I think ultimately this is where Bill shifts us to set us free, to put us on an emotional plane of healing. As Mother Teresa would say, you got to remain green. Why? Because green things are growing. You got to remain green. And so you remain green how? Well, if you're an extremely self-centered person, which I think all human beings are, but alcoholics to an extreme level, then we have to die to ourselves. that we have to come to the end of ourselves. We have to. It's not even up for debate. If we're going to stay, and the book tells us that we have to get rid of this self-centeredness or it's going to kill us. And we can't wish it away. It's going to have to come from something bigger than us, and that's just the truth. But it's not just an intellectual exercise of that truth. It's actually participating in that. It's old saying, God will move mountains for you, but he's going to ask you to bring a shovel and not just to lean on it. We have to participate in this journey. And the minute I stop is the minute I'm regressing back into the abyss, and ultimately my channel will get clogged, which is what happened to one of the guys I was telling you about in the beginning. And eventually, you blow your life up. And all these guys I'm talking about today are all double-digit guys. So I mean, it could happen to any of us, and it's part of the delusion. This is the manifestation of delusion. It's kind of like a cordless drill. You got a cordless drill that's a really good quality, and you take it off the charger, it's going to sound great for a long time. It'll go, 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 go. But eventually that thing's going to start to wear. But then the pride and the fear set in by then. And I'm not going to tell nobody that, because I'm going to want you to think I'm still fully charged. And eventually I wake up one morning, I click it, and it's just dead. And that's the delusion that this is the same delusion that blew my life up before I ever drank. It's the same delusion that'll blow my life up when I'm not drinking any longer. So it's part of that. So these delusions, these 5 delusions, and starting to understand there was value to my life, that there was purpose to my life. As page 124 would say, cling to the thought that your dark past is the greatest possession you possess. Because with that experience, you can avert misery and death for a lot of people. You hold the keys to the kingdom. And that comes with a huge responsibility, but it's also, you can call it, a great hardship, but it's also the greatest blessing we can ever be. Because when I'm, as we say in the Ozark Mountains, when I'm busy thinking about that knucklehead, I'm not thinking about this one. And my life just doesn't get any better than that. There's just tremendous magic when I'm divorced from me about whatever's going on with me, emotionally, mentally, physically, even. It's just something happens, and it's just magic. And I don't have to know what it is or how to figure it all out. I just know that dying to self is ultimately what it's about. It's, there was an old Catholic priest, some of you remember Father Martin, who studied under Dr. Walter Green, and he came back and he put Dr. Green's whole presentation on a chalkboard and called it Chalk Talk, and it was famous. You can still watch it today. But one of the things I always took from that film, and this is not an endorsement of that, it's not AA approved, but it's there's some good stuff in it, was this equation of E over I versus I over E. And one of the equations in there is a layout, and I'm not going to go into a dissertation of it, but basically the bottom line is that when we get here, the equation is E over I. Emotions override our intellect. We don't think, we feel, so we respond. It's not a moral issue. It's just I feel this way, and I'm going to respond to that feeling. It doesn't. I don't pause when agitated. I don't stop and think. I don't bounce it off a sponsor. I just blah and I vomit whatever I'm going to vomit on you. But hopefully, as we mature here, that equation shifts and it becomes I over E. That the intellect starts to override the emotion, and the intellect is made up of resources like sponsorship and 36 principles we have in this program, and repetition of those principles in our life over and over again, shaping us into a new creature, a new person, and how we respond to life, that we just don't blow up because things don't go our way. It doesn't mean there's not an internal battle going on, but we just don't respond to it negatively. And that's a powerful way to live. So this soul sickness, and C.S. Lewis would say that we don't have a soul, we are a soul. And I've always loved that framework, because if you think about that on the context of what is the soul, it's our mind, our emotions, and our will. And whatever comes into the mind, if I let my emotions get attached to it, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to willfully act on it every single time. The Bible would call that the flesh. I'm not talking about this, but just that brokenness of the human. And I tell people all the time, if you test the flesh, you'll lose every single time. I don't care how long you've been around, how much you know, who your sponsor is. You can recite this book forward and backwards. If you test the flesh, you'll lose every single time. And it's just the nature of the beast, and it's reality. I want to close. I shared this little poem the other day on another thing I was doing, and People liked it. A lot of people never heard it before. And so I just thought I would share it to you. It's a poem called Dying to Self. Now, I've edited this poem. The original author is unknown. They don't know who wrote this poem. I've edited it for a more of a, a neutral spiritual language. But I want to share it with you, and because I think you'll identify, and I think it speaks right into what emotional sobriety ultimately looks like. And so let me read this as I close out. And the title of it again is called Dying to Self. And I quote, "When you are forgotten, neglected, or purposely ignored, and you don't sting and hurt with the insult of the oversight, but your heart is happy, being counted worthy to suffer for a power greater than yourself, that is dying to self. When your good is spoken of as evil, your wishes are crossed, your advice disregarded, your opinion ridiculed, and you refuse to let anger rise in your heart or even defend yourself, but take it all in with a patient, loving silence, that is dying to self. When you lovingly and patiently bear any disorder and irregularity or any annoyance, when you stand face to face with waste, folly, extravagance, spiritual insensibility, and endure it as countless recovered alcoholics who went before us have, that is dying to self. When you are content with any food, offering, climate, society, clothing, and interruption by God's will, that is dying to self. When you never care to refer to yourself in conversation, record your good works, or itch after praise, when you can truly love to be unknown, that is dying to self. When you can see your siblings prosper and have their needs met and can honestly rejoice in them in spirit and feel no envy nor question God, while your own needs are far more significant and in desperate circumstances, that is dying to self. When you receive a correction and reproof from one of the lesser statures than yourself and humbly submit inwardly as well as outwardly, finding no rebellion or resentment manifesting within your heart, that is dying to self. And the poem ends with this question: are you dead yet? It's a pretty powerful question. So friends, I appreciate you, Chris, brother. Let me come and share with you guys tonight. Everybody, thank you so much. That's all I got.
All right, Harold. Wow, thanks so much. As you were reading that, I had to Google that poem and I read along with you. That's a great poem. I don't really have the words. We generally invite you to call on 2 or 3 folks. I see we already have a hand. So Harold, I'll go to Joanna if that's okay. Come back and see if you have some folks to call on. And Harold, before I ask Joanna to share, would you be willing to type in those 4 myths in the chat? You're muted. You there? Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me now? There you go.
Yeah, I got you.
You mean the 5 big delusions?
That's it. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I'll put
I
them
write
in
it
there.
down.
Yeah, I'll put them in there.
Great. Thank you. Joanna.
I'm Joanna. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you, Harold. I really liked what you had to say. And so I want to thank you for your chair from the bottom of my heart. And it's really interesting to me because you use completely different language than me. However, we're saying the same thing, which is always interesting to me, you know. So thank you for your chair. It was great to hear you. I believe the same things you do, but I talk about them very differently. So if you look at the superficial content, you might not recognize that, but if you see the essence of it, we're saying the same thing. So thank you. I'm an alcoholic. I'm Joanna, and thank you for your chair.
Thank you, Joanna. So Harold, is there anyone here you'd love to toss it to, hear from?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll always want to hear from my buddy Gary, so I'll call on Gary to share.
Thanks, Harold. Good to see you. Been a while. I was relating to just about everything you talked about. I was thinking, got me thinking a little bit about what I felt like to what I thought I was before I found anything close to sobriety, and the struggles just trying to get along. I was afraid to talk to girls. I was afraid to do things that all the other fellows were doing. And then finally I saw the guys that looked like they were tough and across the street in seventh grade at a deli and smoking cigarettes. And I thought, I'm one of those guys. And it didn't work out well for me. I was pretty poor at that. But I really just kind of felt like what you were talking about. You came from a country background and trying to get along in the city, and that was a big part of my life. So it kind of felt like we were brothers doing that with that whole thing. It was crazy with that. But thanks a lot. It's good to see you. Good to hear from you.
Thanks, Gary. Harold, anyone else you'd like to hear from?
Oh, let's see. Veronica sure had a big grin ear to ear while I was talking. So how about Veronica?
Oh, hey, Harold. Good to hear what you had to say. My name is Veronica and I am an alcoholic. Wow, there was so much in there. And I'm just going to go straight to the end, when you were reading that poem and, the punchline is, are you, what is it? Are you dead yet? Or have you died yet? And I was like, no, still hanging in there. I mean, and, it's interesting that before you read that poem, and as you were talking, and I thought, oh, when am I just going to finally just give it up? Just give it up, Veronica. Like just, that's pretty much it. I mean, the struggle is real. And there was another thing that you said, and I thought, oh yeah, it's so real when I am in whatever, I'll call it a spin, whatever, whether it's a story, whether it's a drama, whatever it is. I mean, it is so real to me. It's extraordinary how my mind can construct such absolute, I guess a reality and a genuine reality around it. And, and then it's either God starts dragging me out or I start dragging myself out or my sponsor or someone else. And then it's just, I heard actually someone say the other day, swim to shore, start swimming to shore. And that's what I need to do. So anyway, Harold, great to hear you. That was really good. Terrific. Thank you.
Thanks, Veronica. Thank you. Harold, one more, and then folks, if you'd like to share or respond to Harold, please raise your hand.
How about Nancy from LA?
Hi, my name is Nancy and I'm an alcoholic. Thank you, Harold. And thank you so much for your share. I lived so much of my life not knowing what you shared about, not knowing that I needed to die to self. I thought everything that had become me in my life, that I was to use that to live this life. And I remember before I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was sitting at the table and it looked like my family was looking for me. Like, where's the Nancy we raised? Where's she at? Where's the debutante? And I was just getting ready to move to Skid Row with my dog because I didn't know where Nancy was either. And if I had known that it had been in all these disillusionments that I was living my life by, that if I could have stopped needing you to act a certain way for me to be okay, if I had known those things, if I had known that my interest, my relationship needed to be in that power greater than myself and not in me and what I created. And all those things I didn't know. And I didn't know why life was going so poorly. And I didn't know why I felt so miserable and why I wanted to die so many times. I just didn't know. But I did not have that emotional sobriety. And now my life, there has been great leaps and bounds. When Bill ends that story about to live in the bright sunshine, that's what my life is now, but it was that letting go of self and taking hold of what God would have me be. That's made a major difference in my life. So thank you, Harold. I really love the way you put this here, and I'm going to listen to it over and over. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks. How about everyone else? This is an open share. Raise your hand digitally on the screen, and I'd love to call on you. Susan, great to see you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Susan. I'm an alcoholic. Wow, that was special. Really, Harold, that was really special. You know, I mean, as you were talking, especially about your early days, we're kind of in the same non-graduating class of recovery. I was just thinking we're all friggin' miracles here. Like we all end up like so messed up with so many old ideas about things that are so not true about, coming from how we were raised and, our defense mechanisms around, how we think we have to live in this world and show up in this world and protect ourselves from, the big bad whatevers, that are out there to get us. And we all just end up in these horrifying jails, whether they be physical jails like you talked about, emotional jails, spiritual jails. We're all just, suffering. All of us, I mean, I don't know one alcoholic that, has ever really said, I had this great childhood and my parents were really functional and I had a lot of love and attention and, people listened to my feelings and, I got to express myself and, say what I needed and they actually responded, like that didn't happen to any of us. Part of it may be generational or whatever. And so this recovery for me has been this, you call it dying to self. I call it the removal of everything that is not me. And everything that is not me is all that stuff. It's all that, those old ideas, those wasted, kind of trying to get people to do what I want them to do, thinking that I'm in control, that I can somehow manipulate the world so that I feel somewhat safe and comfortable. And I spent year after year after year, even when I, as I got in the program, it's like, I still was trying to do that, but I was trying to do it from a different lens. Like I was doing it from like the lens of, well, I'm in the program now and I believe in God. So, God is just this bigger version of Susan, right? And if I just kind of, pray to God that I'll get what I want. Like that's how I lived. And, it's been this slow but steady realization year after year, just trudging this road that we are, that we're all on, where, I finally made this kind of a shift into this emotional sort of different dimension of thinking about the way that I experience you, the way I experience you, meaning all of us, you, and the way I experience God, and the way I just realized that there's nothing I need to do. It's in the undoing, right? It's in the showing up. It's in the allowance and the acceptance of who, and who and what we all each are, that gives me the freedom to say what you said, like want the best for everybody, want the best for my family members, not be jealous of them. Want, if somebody in my company makes a sale and I don't, it used to freak me out. Now it's like, good for you. There's enough for everybody. Like this world is abundant. And karma comes to us in all kinds of ways, good and bad. And so, I mean, you just triggered so much things going on in me. So I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I really enjoyed it. And it's good to be here tonight. I know we're missing a lot of our friends who are at the conference. Sorry we can't be there too, but nice to see everybody.
Thanks, Susan. Regina.
Hey, everybody. Thank you. My name is Regina. I'm a recovered alcoholic addict. And 15 years ago today, I am an impossibly lucky person who got to walk back through the doors of this program and take a seat. And I just, Harold, your talk tonight was so spot on. I feel like the biggest things that I have had to grapple with is delusion. And so to hear you really focus and use that term and talk about the layers of it is a tremendous birthday gift. So thank you. Thank you. And I just, because being in here and being in recovery this time has really been about stripping those layers of what my many, many delusions have been. And also to see, and it was another thing you talked about, is this underpinning of self-pity, which is a killer. It's a killer. And I don't want to die from it. I really don't. And so I just, what you said went straight to the heart. And I love that kind of the umbrella for it is what you called the delusion of inequality. I've never heard it spoken that way before. And man, you just like hit the dartboard right in the center. So I'm so grateful that I could be here today and really hear this message. And of course, I can't wait till the recording comes out so I can share it. So thank you, brother. And thanks everyone, because we do this together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else like to share? Emerson, it'd be great to hear from you.
Hi, everyone. Emerson, recovered addict, alcoholic. Thank you so much for your lead. I really relate to some of the feelings you had. Just like you, I'm a person that had to go to prison, and the fact of the matter is, and it sounds like maybe it was similar for you, is I was actually safer in there than I was on the street. I was much safer to myself and to people around me. And the thing you said in the delusions, I think Regina, was just not touching on it, she was speaking on it, was even when I had some sobriety, I relapsed after 5 years. But I think it was the third delusion you had listed and it really hit me. This was like this secret that I hid deep inside. I didn't talk to my sponsor about it. I didn't share about it in meetings. But the fact is that I felt I had done too much damage to ever be redeemed. I felt I had gone too far, done too much. How can I overcome this? Look at all the people I've hurt. I just felt that I would never be able to balance out the scales. And I tried to put on a brave face and do the steps and play the part. But I mean, to be dragging around an anchor that heavy that no matter what I do, I can't overcome the wreckage that I've done is huge. And you're right, it's a delusion, it's fantasy. Because as it turns out, the wreckage of my past is my greatest asset. I mean, I've gone from a person in a prison cell to now working in an emergency room. And specifically because of, I get to work with addicts, alcoholics that come in and consult with the doctors and nurses. We try and find either a treatment options or some kind of help for these people. And I don't think I would be effective at my job unless I've been through what I've been through. I can, and I'm sure you or all of us in some degree of experiences. I think there's a certain connection that's made when each of us, alcoholic, addict, whatever the case is with you, when we talk to another person, they can feel that we've been through what they've been through. They can feel like, okay, this person understands. And it's just like that picture of, you see all the time up in meetings and stuff of Dr. Bob and Bill talking, I guess it was to alcoholic number 3 in the bed. I mean, the guy was sitting up because he knows these men talking to him understand. They've been there. So thank you for talking about the delusion. So I need to kind of be on alert to really ask to be shown, perhaps with a little more clarity. Do I still hold some of that delusion? Like, have I gone too far? Have I done too much? Can this ever be righted? Can I actually be free of my past? So thank you so much, Harold, for your lead. It was amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, Emerson. I really appreciate that. Harold, I'd love to toss it back to you if you have any closing thoughts and words, but before you share that, I just want to say that, of course, I love the 5 delusions, and I asked you to put them in the chat selfishly because I wanted to put them in a little notepad here. Also, just for folks, I copied the poem into the chat, the poem that the Dying to Self poem. But Harold, the thing that really spoke to me the most was you're talking about the clogging of that channel. And I actually have my own story when something really horrific happened in my life. I did something just really awful and hidden. All of a sudden, I felt like God left. God was just gone from the scene. And it was everything you said tonight about that channel clogging up and all the work it takes to unclog it has nothing to do with God relocating or disappearing. It has to do with our ability to perceive and be present. So do you have any closing thoughts as friends have shared tonight, Harold?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's always a great subject, emotional sobriety, and it's got so many parts to it. I can see why it's just a great weekly topic, week in and week out, and amazing shares that come from it. And if there's a bridge between us and God, and there's something there's something blocking that bridge, well, there's nothing getting across. And so the steps, and as beautiful as they are, give us a real practical way to remove whatever debris is in the way. And if we come all the way in, set all the way down with it, we have that experience. We have this spiritual experience, that's necessary, to overcome the delusions of inequality and that I'm not worth anything, and to finally get to a space where that I am accepted and loved by this creator that we call a higher power, we call God, is anybody. To go from that space to get there is just, there's so much power in that. But then to go from that to go from a very self-centered taker to a giver, to have that transformation of going from a taker to a giver, and truly staying in that life of dying to self and living out this idea of love and service, of to be a maximum service, as our real purpose would say, to be a maximum service to God and the people in our life, to really live into that. And I think it tells us on page 152, 153 that if you really subscribe to this way of life, that the most satisfactory years of your years lie ahead of you, that you're going to make lifelong friends here, that this crazy imagination will be fired, and that life will mean something at last. And the beautiful part about it is, and this is what's beautiful about it, is through this transformation, or through this emotional sobriety walk that we go through, we get to walk shoulder to shoulder with other people and help them rediscover life. And as the book goes on top of page 153 says, if you do that long enough, and I'm paraphrasing, that you'll finally know what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. And the beauty of that, I think, is what Bill wrote in our writing tonight, is that you finally get to live into loving people for just because they're people, not because they're this, that, or there. It's just, and not because they deserve it, because they need it. It's just a huge shift in that undertaking. And then what I've discovered in my life is that the best way I can honor God, praise God, worship God, isn't by singing praise songs or prayer or any of those things, although I need all those things to connect. But it's not how I honor, I think, this higher power. I think the way I honor this higher power the best is by loving you, by loving others. And I think that's the greatest way I can love this higher power that we call God in my life. And And I think that's the calling and the command I have on my life is to do that. Just go love people. It doesn't matter what they did yesterday. It doesn't matter what they're doing tomorrow. Just love them. And Alcoholics Anonymous is the most kingdom of God looking thing that there is on the planet, to create that space. And it's why people, when they come to treatment, I'm in a treatment center every week, when people are leaving, everybody's signing in their books and they're all hugging and they're all crying for 30 days, probably for the first time in their life. Many of them have experienced this unconditional agape love in their life. And our illness has no defense against that. There's no defense against it. And it's why it's so hard to leave those places, because you're afraid you're never going to experience that again. But when you finally have this total transformation in being, the soul sickness starts to heal, you realize that this channel is way God can work through us to bless other people. And as a result, we get blessed tenfold in return. And so that's just the most honest, I think the most honest and authentic way I can love God is by loving you. And it's a beautiful way to live. And I'm forever grateful that you all show me how to do that. Thanks.
Well, thanks again, Harold. I'd love for you to do another hour. So come back and join us. Friends, the link that I put into the Dropbox at the beginning of the meeting, you can scroll up in the chat. Hopefully in a week or so, that's when Harold's chat will be in that Dropbox. Come back next week and join us, especially if this is your first time. And Harold, I have to say, we have a lot of friends from this meeting who are at the Fellowship of the Spirit conference tonight and aren't here. And Sam Glenn, I texted with Sam, who's often here. He told me to ask you questions, and I don't know what he wants me to ask you, but I'm grateful for all the gems that you gave us tonight. The way that we close this meeting here is that we just take a moment silently. We started 2 years ago, I think, starting with the Lord's Prayer. Whether it's the Lord's Prayer, whatever a prayer that's meaningful for you, let's just take a moment, go to our inner room, quiet ourselves, say a prayer, and then we're going to come back and thank Harold.